Cool.
All good. So I guess we're recording and ready. So where to start? Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. Kylie's had the dubious pleasure of working with me on numerous projects, I guess now. In the past, as may have been evident in the bio or whatever gibberish that I managed to pass over for everyone to read, I work with agility. I'm not an adherent to any particular methodology, so I work generally in agility is how I put it. Obviously work with Cynefin and complex adaptive systems quite a lot as well, distributed working, and really the core of everything that I do is learning and engagement. So I build models for human learning and engagement. And as you can see, I have some lightsabers and things behind me as well. This is my usual work background, so I think it makes things a little more interesting, maybe. It was better downstairs in terms of the swords, wasn't it, Kylie? I had all the swords from martial arts behind me. It was amazing how many people did Agile properly when I was talking to them with that background. It's not quite as good these days, but still. So I love my sci-fi, I love my fantasy, and so on and so forth. And I have done a TEDx talk on collaboration, which I actually removed from all my slides because I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing about it, but Kylie's kindly brought that back up. So I guess we can, in the chat, if people are having trouble sleeping and you have 18 minutes free. So there we go. So what we were going to talk about, or what was going to be kind of on the agenda today, I guess, was the certainty and uncertainty. Now, Cynefin complex systems is part of this, definitely, very definitely. I could have included loads of boring stuff on OODA loops and whatever, but actually I was going to do a cut down version of a talk that I did a little while ago, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of make it a bit more, I guess, interactive. You know, there's nothing than sitting there talking at people, text, like it's just awful. So it's up to you. I can do that. It's not a problem. But what are your thoughts collectively on kind of discussing bits as we go through them, and Q&A and discussion, because I tend to prefer that if possible. Or is everyone just dog tired after a horrific day of heat? Can't see what, let me have a look in the chat. Nobody's saying a word. I think everyone's passed out already. I have no problem with people asking me questions with a mouthful of food, like as long as the camera's not on and I can't see it, it's all good. So, well, why don't we try this? Why don't I start going through some of the slides, and then if anyone sees anything particularly interesting or not, can tell me and we can talk about it either way, or I can skip it. Does that sound like a plan, maybe? Cool beans. Okay, well, without further ado, let me screw up sharing my screen for about 5 minutes before we manage to get anything done. Let me see if I can. Yep, I've managed to screw it up already. I've got the wrong thing on the wrong page. Right, here we go. Kylie's seen, I think, or pictures of my ridiculous home setup. I've got monitors flapping around all over the place, so it ends up being pretty bad. So I need to share the screen, if it let me, come on. Hooray. I think it's sharing it. Can everyone see?
Yeah, it looks good at this end.
PowerPoint. Excellent. So I actually got rid of all of the previous things. There was a TEDx slide and so on. which I'm not going to bother with. It was interesting talking about collaboration. Just I'll reference the TEDx quickly, because one of the reasons that we've learned to collaborate so well is because we do deal with a world that is uncertain. And so it was kind of talking about the seeds of collaboration, where it came from, essentially. Plenty of animals collaborate. And so I talked a lot about, you know, how we change but don't like changing, and how alignment is not necessarily the same as collaboration, where we're all invested and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that I think was really interesting that I touch on here is, well, it's the idea of complexity, it's the idea of narrative, and it's the idea of trying to bring order to a world that we don't often have the answers for, which can be quite interesting. So when we look at it in a complex lens. So the picture I have here is, you've got a map and you've got a compass. Kylie is probably bored to death of hearing me talk about these bits and pieces by now, but humans love certainty in the form of being able to plan what we're going to do. We like to think of everything as ordered, right? So in this instance, you've got a map, and we like to pick up a map and say, I'm going to go here. You know, very often we've planned out how we're going to get there. We plan out where we're going on this map. Organizations, as I'm sure all of you are aware, are very much like this. They say, where's our roadmap? Where are we going to be in a year, 5 years, or whatever? The problem with that is, and COVID was a perfect example, when context changes, the business landscape changes quite radically, a map is no longer of any use, right? So in that kind of instance, what we need is to find our way, and we need a compass more, which gives us a direction which we can then modify as we go. Now, this induces what I will call an uncertainty. It's quite a scary concept, right? We don't really know where we're going. So we like to try to analyze things, right? We can chart certainty, but picking a direction is really where we're kind of trying to go when we don't know where we're going, when we don't know what we're doing. My current client is not handling this well. Let's put it that way. It's not going particularly well. When you feel in crisis or adrift or in limbo, set processes just don't solve things, right? So we need to find this new context. We need feedback, fast feedback, to find where we're going, and then we go and explore. So that's kind of the basis of what this is all about. So here's a question. Is everyone or anyone familiar with kind of risk management and bell curves and all of that kind of thing? I actually can't see the chat at the moment. It'd be useful if I could see. I can't see the chat. Anyway, typically what we do when we try to estimate what's going to happen is we utilize what we have on the left here, which is a Gaussian distribution, right? So this is the boring technical stuff I'm going to get out of the way in the beginning, and then I'll wake you all up with some nice pictures in a minute. And we like things to fall inside or outside a bell curve, and we tend to base these things on what we call low probability, high impact events, right? So this is a lot of risk management, a lot of trying to predict the future. It comes from saying, well, these things are high impact, but they're probably not going to happen. They're a black swan event, right? Unfortunately, they're a little bit more probabilistic than we think. There's a thing called a fat tail. If you use what we have on the right here, which is a Pareto distribution, which is how events usually work actually in nature, which shows that most things that are going to go wrong are probably medium probability, high impact. This is something called abductive reasoning. I'm not going to go into it because it's kind of a bit boring, but what you're looking at are the differences between what's probable, what's possible, and what is plausibly going to happen. There are so many things that could plausibly happen. There is no way you could make everything fail safe. It's just not possible. Everything will fail at some point. So what we talk about more, especially with complex adaptive systems theory, is safe to fail. You make a system resilient, and you know that it's probably going to be okay if it fails. Like there are, fast probes you can run, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, right? So Pareto distribution is really interesting. It works for things like fleas and elephants. It works for things like earthquakes. and it works for things like towns versus, or villages versus cities, right? The more frequent they are, the less magnitude they tend to have. And if you think about earthquakes as an example, there are, you know, untold numbers of small earthquakes every day, but we very rarely have the extremely high impact ones that cause huge amounts of damage. So this is something called a power law. I'm probably doing it the wrong way for the way you're looking at it. This is something called a power law. When you apply it to how things happen, to how we try to generate certainty from a risk management point of view, that's where you get this fat tail that actually says things are more likely to happen than we believe. Uncertainty is going to happen, right? Failure is going to happen. So it's something that we have to live with and we have to be able to manage, right? So it's really important to understand that. Companies love to say, we are going to, you know, have our ordered roadmap and we're going to make sure nothing can ever fail. Very good examples of this, just as a very quick example of something Dave Snowden from Cognitive Edge gives, is an example of how a C-suite will deal with issues within a company. For example, it's all treated as if it's ordered. We should know how to deal with this. We've got policies in place, we've got rules, we've got teams, we can do all these things. And then they go home and they have children. And you don't, you know, if you're getting ready for a children's party, you don't put them in a room with motivational Balrog posters or whatever on the wall and say, okay, what are the outcomes of this party going to be? How can we assess the performance of everyone during this party? Like you don't do that. That's not what defines a successful kids party. In fact, in Dave's terms, you draw a line in the sand and you, okay, if you cross this, you little bastards, you die. Anything else, you're good with. And then you introduce attractors to see what they're going to be attracted to, games, food, whatever it happens to be. And that's how this kind of emergent, uncertain process plays out, right? So you can't predict these things. They are dispositional. You can guess, but you can't predict what they are, right? So that's a basis of uncertainty. So I guess a good question at this point, and anyone's welcome to chip in, if you could train one or two core attributes to deal with uncertainty, what would they be for you? And you don't have to chip in, we can just move on, but it's a thought.
So Chris, when you say train, you mean practice?
Yeah, if you could try to prepare yourself, what attributes do you think would help you deal with uncertain situations?
Well, being a coach, the first thing I like to train in terms of resilience is the ability to reframe, knowing that that's the most challenging for me. I'm very emotional, and yeah.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really good one. It's something that I have to do, and I have to do constantly. So by the way, a public service announcement, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, and Kylie's aware of this, I'm pretty autistic. So I spend most of my life analyzing stuff and reframing it to understand why people see the world so differently to me, or vice versa, as the case may be. So the ability to reframe things is really, really important. And the ability to realize that that reframing allows the understanding of other people's contexts or different contexts to where you think you might be, I think is really, it's a really core part of uncertainty.
Just in the chat, we also have Vernon Richards saying that curiosity and some flavor of systems thinking.
Curiosity is also very important because you can't discover how to deal with uncertainty if you're not willing to learn and explore. Curiosity is like one of the core parts of it. Absolutely. So as coaches, and I'm guessing pretty much everyone here is a coach of one form or another, we're kind of used to dealing with uncertainty because we have to kind of, I guess, deal with that for, you know, companies on a semi-daily basis, you know, teams, companies, individuals, right? So the idea of building this resilience, how do we build this resilience? How do we look at what this means? Now, I'm going to be a bit of a heretic here, which is something that I take enormous pleasure in doing, is talking about agility and agile as more or less the same kind of thing. So here we have the core concept of agility. I ran this past Alistair Coburn a while ago, expecting him to give me a slap, and actually he kind of agreed with it, which was quite a nice turn up for the book. So I like to take things back to basics. It's very easy to get hung up on frameworks, as all of you are aware, with stuff like agile coaching. I think it's a little ironic that agile and agility, which are designed to try to help us discover things in uncertainty and bring them through into perhaps a slightly more ordered domain for teams, in themselves are often actually treated in a very rigid manner. For example, yet again, I've come across another transformation which is being looked at as a really big project that switches over finally on one day, rather than being an iterative exploration, which is kind of the point, guys, but whatever. So agility and agile have a lot of things in common. And I like to take things back to the basics, where we look at the ability to change, the ability to repurpose, and the ability to respond, right? And this usually happens with grace and with speed. That's kind of what agility is there for, what the word agile, lowercase a, if we want to look at it like that, kind of covers. Now, that's adapt, accept, and react. If you want to look at it in kind of complex systems terms, you're looking at the ability to change yourself based on what's happening, repurpose what you already have very quickly, which is much faster than changing yourself, and reacting or responding. They're slightly different things. Reaction is kind of a little bit more reflexive. Response is usually a choice, but that's kind of a cycle that we tend to go through. And this sort of ties into OODA loops and stuff, but I'm not going to go into OODA loops here because it's a very big discussion that we've been plumbing in other areas with people like Nigel Thurlow. Affordances, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with what affordances are, but they're very essentially, in terms of biology, an affordance is what the environment offers the creatures that live within it. Basic affordances tend to be things like water and food and so on and so forth, right? So the affordances are offering you chances to change, repurpose, and respond, essentially, right? And so this is a core part of being able to evolve, being curious, being able to observe, orient yourself, decide, and act based upon what's around you in your environment. And then the second part, I don't know if anyone, please feel free to shout out, Kylie or Gary, if this comes up in the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to agree, disagree, discuss anything to do with agility there, or agile. No. So I think that there's a second part, like a second side to the coin that we don't always look at. And that is the concept of resilience. Like, this is a core part of agility for me, certainly. And it's slightly different. It's also made up of three things, but it's slightly different. So you have the ability to detect weak signals early, right? See what might be coming. This is what you have to do in an uncertain world. If you don't know what's coming, you need to be able to kind of try to sense what might be coming, so that you can then not be complacent, you can use that feedback, and you can maybe avoid failure. And I'm using failure as in terminal failure, because for me, there is no failure, there's only feedback. Failure shouldn't be seen as the end of everything, but if you can avoid it and still learn the lesson, that's all good. By the way, I'm a diver, so you'll always get this instead of this, because that means go up for me. Then you have the ability to recover quickly. Like, if failure does happen, if something unexpected catches you, one of the core concepts of being agile is the ability to react quickly enough and with enough poise that it doesn't throw you completely off balance. You can recover quickly, and then hopefully you can then exploit that new paradigm and progress and evolve, right? So that's kind of the agility side and the resilience side. I think both of these things are absolutely critical when you're talking about dealing with uncertain situations. I didn't know if anyone wanted to add anything in there or query it or anything.
I'd like to say bravo, because it's a sort of a bit of a self-brushing, but my title on LinkedIn is Enterprise Resilience and Agile Coach. And it has a reason. I worked for many years in security and cryptography, cryptanalysis, and developed distributed systems long before I even got into Agile in 2007. And so I always saw it as one of the core benefits of Agile, agility being one of the others. and I see a strong difference between agile and agility, but that makes me kind of a zealot to some people. But I want to say kudos on this mention of resilience.
Oh, thank you. And yes, that, I mean, I guess you're talking about capital A Agile there. I had a very interesting discussion with a coach from Shell quite a long time ago now, where I did a bit of a bait and switch, where I was like, let's talk about scaling Agile. And then I was like, wham, it's the same as agility. And I was deliberately being obstreperous at this point. And afterwards she said, well, that was a very interesting talk, but actually they're not the same thing. And she said, that's not what Agile is. And I said, okay. So what is Agile? I'm interested to know, because every single day I learn that I'm wrong on a lot of things. So I'm quite happy to be proven wrong here. And she said, well, Agile came from software development, and it's a methodology and an approach for being able to produce software. And I said, well, that's an interesting take on it. Do you consider that Agile came from software development, or that software development was made Agile? And she said, Agile came from software development. So she didn't see the nuance, which I thought was very interesting. There is capital A Agile and there is lowercase Agile. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in all the kind of discussions between the two. I think that when you look at Agile as I don't want to call it a brand. Yes, there are set principles and processes, but like even Alistair's, like, Agile, the whole manifesto was designed as a basic guide to point people in the right direction. It was never designed to be take every single step of this. And it's what is it now, 20 years old? Like its understanding has moved on since then, in good ways and bad ways, right? So, but anyway, it's I never have a strong opinion on these kind of things, because I think there's value in looking at a lot of the different ways. But thank you for that. So,
could I ask a question?
Sure.
I was wondering if you had any examples of like weak signal detection, like what that would look like in practice, how you would actually detect these things.
I do. Yes, in fact. So this is something that you can use with Cynefin. There are a number of different ways you can do it, but I happen to prefer the way that Cynefin do it. And it's not completely a Cynefin thing. It's not just a complex adaptive system thing. I'm sure quite a few of you have heard of sense making. So sense making, the way that it's run by Cognitive Edge, is very interesting. What you're doing is collectively, so not just individuals, you are utilizing stories, and not user stories, but experiences, let's call them, descriptive experiences, as the unit of measurement rather than people. And you are running what generally gets called an unsurvey. It's the opposite of a survey. You're asking people to write something as a small piece of narrative. So for example, if we vaguely remember what a pub is these days, imagine you were in a pub telling one of your closest friends about a day at work. What would that day be like? Positive, negative, whatever it happens to be. Now, what this is a qualitative analysis of what you do, rather than a quantitative set of data that you would produce from what you do, right? So that you are using a description and an experience you've had. So you could use more than one of those, right? As opposed to what a normal survey does, or what normally happens within companies with information exchange, which is quite formal, which is people are offering evaluations and they're not descriptive. They're very often what people think other people want to hear, right? So if you get asked to do a survey and it says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with blah? Depending on your mood, you're very likely to plump around a 3 or a 7, unless something's really annoyed you or really made you happy. Or you might answer it based on what you think management want you to say, right? This is something we do. We try to anticipate, and this is one of those things where we look at phase space and we try to divine consequences, and this is a very human kind of thing that animals don't tend to do quite as much as we do. When you've taken that piece of qualitative data, or sorry, qualitative information, you then gather quantitative data by triads and dyads. Now, a triad is a triangle, but there's no positive, negative, and surveys are always positive and negative. The triads have signifiers, right? And they take a lot of training to work out. These signifiers could be, for example, based upon your story of your day at work, do you feel that your decisions are mostly made by management, customer need, or you. Now that's very interesting because there's a tension between all of those. There's no good, bad, right answer, wrong answer, positive, negative. You'd want that to be in the middle. Very often it's not going to end up in the middle. It's probably going to be nudging towards management, or it might be user need more. If you're very lucky, you can say, haha, I can make all the decisions myself. And that's not necessarily a good thing either, right? So what you do when you've collected this story, this narrative, and there are other ways to do it, but that's a very common one. And you have these triads and dyads, which allow you to analyze this data and see trends. You then filter it by what makes sense, so job role, devs versus QA versus HR versus whatever. You can do it by age range because you do get generational differences in basically in mindset, if you want to look at it like that. I'm not a fan of mindset. Kylie's probably heard me say that many times. I prefer attitude because an attitude is something that can change depending on the circumstances. Most people I know who have a mindset don't tend to change it very easily at all. So I tend to find growth mindset a mild oxymoron, but I do agree with it. Anyway, back to sense making. So what you're doing is you're using this abductive reasoning approach, not to join dots, which is a pre-categorization, which most people do, but you're using it to generate patterns and then allow sense to emerge from those patterns. Now, I don't think I've got it. I haven't got it in these slides, so please forgive me for throwing this at you out of nowhere. But if you have 10 dots, there are 64 ways you can join those dots directly. I'm going to give you a quick guess as to how many patterns can emerge from those 10 dots and 64 connections. Feel free to shout it out. It's a trick question, but nobody's going to go for it. So
no idea.
About 35 trillion. That was not what I guessed the first time I heard that either, so don't feel bad about it. It's a huge number. So you literally, this is where we come back to that not being able to predict what's going to happen, the plausibility kind of thing. You literally can't predict what patterns will emerge. You can't prepare for everything. So all you can do is try to detect these weak signals. Now with sense making, you get visual representations and you run it across large numbers of people. Like, there's no point in running it for less than 40 people. Like, it's not an individual thing. You want large data sets here. And this is what Dave calls thick data and big data. So big data is all the information and thick data is high quality information. So that's your quantitative and your qualitative information. So you use the quantitative data and you color it with the context of the qualitative, and you see it visually and you can see where all the stories actually lie. I'll give you a really good example of this and then I can move on, stop boring everyone to death with it. There was a sense-making run on the Puerto Rican hurricane 2017. The governments were expecting, and all the authorities were expecting everyone to be very negative, everyone to be blaming authority for not having prepared. They had, one of the triads had water, communication, and electricity as which of these do you think is the most important? And almost without fail, for people who lost houses and family, all of the stories were overwhelmingly positive, because you can't stop a hurricane and people aren't stupid, they know that. But what happened was the community came together and suddenly people realized that they were a part, not a part. And that was really powerful for them. But not just that, they also then realized that where they were expecting water and electricity, everyone was picking communication as the priority because the community gave them the rest and a sense of belonging. It was really interesting. So you can't prepare for all this. You can't guess what it is, but the weak signals for, if you run sense making before disasters, you can see where people really are. And that allows you to prepare much more accurately for where things may end up, rather than what happens in most organizations, which is people where management think they are and where people think management want them to be. Does that hopefully answer the question in a really long-winded way? Cool.
Yes, thank you.
Kylie will tell you of the dangers of ever asking me anything ever. So apologies for that, but hopefully it was useful. So I guess the last thing to think of is the fact that resilience, we talked about resilience a little bit, but so the context is dictating essentially how you will respond, but agility also, and this is something that I think often gets forgotten. I forget this all the time as well, by the way. It's very human. You can't have agility without movement. Right? Nothing that is static is agile because it just sits there. Like, you must have movement. You must have a journey. You must have the movement along a path, which is why I tend to prefer looking at things in terms of vectors, maybe measurements rather than metrics, because metrics are point in time. Measurements are kind of how are we doing on the journey, and the vectors are where are we, what is the movement in the journey kind of thing, or what is the journey itself. So anyway, I think we can probably move on from there now. I think one of the interesting things to look at here then, how we pass the stories on, and actually thanks Chris, the sense making kind of thing has segued very nicely into this. Humans actually pass information best informally in the form of stories and narrative, right? So bullet points, if you think about the last time you looked at a set of bullet points and how many of them you remembered versus the last time someone told you a story, I can pretty much guess which one of them you would remember better, which one sticks in your head the most. You know, I could tell you things about what I've been doing for the last 24 years in DevOps and agility and blah, 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 blah. But I could also tell you a story of when I was 5 and I went into my parents' bedroom and I climbed up on a dresser and I found an unopened brand new bottle of Chanel No. 5. And I took it down and opened it and drank the whole bottle. And then my parents took me to hospital. Kylie's laughing, I could see her. My parents took me to hospital and I saw the doctor and I said, oh no, I'm not going to be stomach pumped again, am I? Which probably tells you a little bit more about me as a child. If I came back to you at the end of this session and I said, do you remember what I've said about DevOps, blah, 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 blah? Some of you might say, well, yeah. And I say, who remembers what I said to doctors when I was 5? And you'll all be like, yeah, you know, because stories have a lot of power, right? So the narratives are really powerful. Now, what's really interesting with stories is the fact that they make us, again, this is the kind of the becoming a part, not being a part. That didn't sound so good, but I think you know what I mean, right? So this happens, I've said it better on the slide, when stories combine, me becomes we, right? That was actually something I managed to get into the TEDx without sounding like an idiot. So I was quite happy with that little success. But what that means is stories combine into something called assemblages, which actually don't have a beginning or an end. A very easy assemblage to think of is any fantasy book or story or film or any sci-fi or any story that has a hero. Anything like that, you have a hero's journey. And we all expect to roughly know what the hero's journey is going to be. It's an assemblage, right? And it's through cultures. Different cultures maintain the same kind of thing. Stories of vampires and werewolves exist in many, many cultures. Dragons exist in many, many cultures. The stories are different, but they follow a roughly similar path. And when they all come together, they form this assemblage, if you like. And when that happens, we share them because we all have a uniquely contextual example of these things. So your story about, oh, I had this team and they won't stop talking about SAFe or Scrum or Kanban or Waterfall or whatever it happens to be, Prince 2, whatever, right? Everyone has stories that are similar, but they will be unique to you. Your stories are unique, but we share enough of them that we feel a connection when we talk about them. Does that kind of make sense to people? More or less. So, you know, I have a story. You can see me there as a diver. I do lots of stuff. I do a lot of random crap. Kylie can tell you about all the random stuff that I do at some point. So I'm like qualified as a rescue diver and various other things. Last time I went diving in the Philippines, I got lost at sea. Wasn't a particularly good experience. It was a nice place, but I was a mile out from shore in 100 meters of water. I couldn't see anything around me. It was a little bit alarming. Up until I started realizing how peaceful it was and being able to see every tiny creature coming past my mast, because I had nothing else to look at as I went into land, and I'd forgotten my float to let me come up so boats didn't kill me. I reached into my pocket and remembered that we were doing pressure testing, and I pulled out an egg. It was not my finest moment, if I'm honest with you. You're meant to be a lot more prepared. But again, uncertainty, right? Things will happen and you won't always be prepared for everything. So I did what I could, and I, kind of extemporized and worked out how to deal with it. Now, not everyone has a story of being lost at sea and diving, but I'm sure a number of you have stories about getting lost somewhere and thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do now? We all share these kind of stories, right? That allows us to realize that other people are human, other people are vulnerable, other people share uncertainty, and that's a key part of uncertainty. We're all vulnerable, we're all human, we all experience things in similar ways. I mean, I don't, I'm autistic, but I'm still technically human, so more or less the same, right? So there's that sense of belonging, right? And that's an internal certainty. I may not know what the future holds, but I know that other people don't know what the future holds either. That's a certainty. There are ways to find certainty in uncertainty, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. I think I've disappointed Kylie, doing a really heavy Cynefin kind of session, and I'm off talking about other stuff, but she can beat me up later. So let's pop to the next slide. One of the things that allows us to share this, and please, anyone feel free to chip in at any point, but one of the things that allow us to share these stories is this sense of belonging, which requires us to be able to develop relationships with other people, right? And I'm going to go through this super quickly. I think after much reflection, and this is not accurate, no models are true, right? They're only useful. I think that there are four main things, or four foundations for any relationships between any human beings sustainably, right? One of them has to be a basis or a foundation of love or respect. If you don't respect people, you don't care about them, you're not going to form any kind of relationship with them. Like there's no point, there's nothing in it for you. You must also have honesty. You must also have trust. And I'm sure you see this a lot with your teams, right? You must establish trust if you're going to achieve anything as a coach, both between you, and you have to engender trust between everyone in the team and the teams that have dependencies with that team, right? So trust is really important. Honesty is required for that. But the last thing is the most important, which is communication. Because if you don't have communication, you can't show the rest of it, right? How can you do any of that? And there's a number of other things, but I think that they all kind of relate to a lot of those things. If you have those relationships, you have a much better ratio of bonding with people, information transfer, especially informally, retention of information. And again, this comes, I think, down to stories, right? I think that's quite a powerful thing to remember. And remember what we talked about with the sense making involves a story, because it's a uniquely human aspect that gives flavor to the data. I do have a talk that I did. By the way, I hate videos. I hate seeing myself on camera. I did a talk on kintsugi a little while ago because I felt it was important. I'm a massive mental health advocate, especially for neurodiversity. I think that it's very, very important to understand that vulnerability is a key aspect of being human. And that means that we have to recognize that all of us face this uncertainty, and it has, in one way or another, broken all of us at some point. All of us will have lost family. All of us will have lost friends. All of us will have lost jobs. All of us will have experienced sudden, catastrophic uncertainty in our lives. And so if you ever want to see that, it's funny, I removed my TEDx one, but I've left that link in there. I mean, I'm happy to send these slides around afterwards if people really want them. You're more than welcome to them. I'm not precious about them. So you can watch that, and if it helps one person, then I'm happy. But I find it difficult to watch myself talking, so I tend not to watch it very often if I can possibly help it. But it's important for individuals and organizations to realize that uncertainty is there, it isn't going away, and it is okay not to be okay. When you recover, when you utilize your resilience, you become stronger because of the things that have happened, not despite them. Right. So I think that that's a really important part of dealing with uncertainty. Right. This is a big psychological safety and mental health and cultures and so on and so forth. Which semi-neatly, unless there's another question, I haven't been watching the chat. I've been busy waffling. Does anyone want to jump in or comment or query or? By the way, kintsugi is what I picked there, the Japanese art of pottery. I'm an idiot. I'm not even telling people what the picture is. Kintsugi is the art of repairing something that was broken, usually in a way that makes it more beautiful than it was before. So I think it's a really lovely way of describing it. Anyway. So then we get to complexity and why we try to order the world. We are getting to some Cynefin stuff at some point. Why do we try to order the world around us? Well, when we're faced with uncertainty, one of the things, and let's think back to everyone in management we know who jumps. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I'm actually going to.
Oh. That's okay. You can jump in at any point. You can re-ask the question or whatever. So, where was I? Yes. So one of the reasons that we try to order the world around us, from what I can tell, is, and you will see this from any managers that you deal with, probably quite a few of them, who insist on defaulting to command and control, structures and bureaucracy and whatever, is because we try to use control or order to make sense of the world, but then to hold on to the sense of the world. We're very strange creatures. We excel at adapting and changing ourselves in the world around us. We don't like doing it. We like to be comfortable. So we will do everything we can to avoid change and to hold on to that comfort. And again, I haven't put lots to do with comfort zones and stuff in here. I think there's something coming up, but that's those, I look at models of stuff like that as well. But when we talk about control, really, we're kind of going back to the Stoics kind of now, and we're talking about Stoicism here. Daniel Kahneman talks about this kind of stuff. Really, to be okay, to be able to deal with uncertainty, you have to accept that there are only two things in the world that you can really control, and they are your thoughts and your actions. Anything outside that kind of has to be okay. Easier said than done, but it kind of has to be okay. You can influence it at best, but you can't control it, and that's just okay. And I like that visual because you've got the contrast there, right? I don't normally like binary things, but I quite like this one. And then we go into kind of all of the stuff. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has a lot of benefits. I don't always necessarily agree with every context it's used in. And I mentioned psychological safety. So that starts going into culture. Culture is a huge part of this, especially in organizations, right? Are we included? Are we learning things? Are we able to contribute? Are we able to challenge the status quo, right? Are we able to feel safe doing any of these things, to innovate? And you can find that too much respect and not enough permission gives you this kind of very good job, but you just go and do this kind of attitude. And the other way, where you have permission to do stuff but no respect, is very much get on with your job, don't talk to me, do what you're told, that kind of thing. You've got permission to do this, then get on and do it, don't answer back. So it's quite a fine line to walk for psychological safety. The inclusion aspect is a very key kind of fundamental part of it, right? And for me, psychological safety with teams I work with is really, really important, because you're never going to deal with uncertainty if you're panicking, right? You can't think of anything else. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, the basic physiological needs and safety, you can't evolve, you can't thrive if you are just in survive mode, right? It's very difficult to do that. So I knew I put something on comfort zones in here somewhere. I develop a few of these models. I don't think that there's only one comfort zone that we all have. Sorry, it's on its side. It looks like a kidney or a couple of kidneys. It's kind of deliberate. They feed into each other, right? We have multiple comfort zones. If you think about your comfort zone, your personal comfort zone, if something happens that damages your self-belief in your ability, your self-confidence, like that damages everything in your life. But if you make a mistake at work in a team where you're buffered by bureaucracy and heuristics and policies and whatever else, people make mistakes at work that would horrify you if you make that mistake on your own in a critical moment in your personal life. So we do have different comfort zones with different performance zones, right? There are a load of comfort zone things out there. They are not, most of them are not psychologically sound, right? There's pushing through the fear barrier and whatever. It's not really a fear barrier. When you get to proper fear, you're talking about panic and anxiety. And as somebody who is autistic and has imposter syndrome to a ridiculous degree, I can tell you what anxiety and panic are like. I don't know, I know probably a couple of you know who Neil Gaiman is, a very successful writer, very, very talented guy, really lovely guy. Met him at a few author conferences from time to time. He told a story a while ago about how when he was in a room, there were loads of celebrities everywhere, and he stood next to another guy called Neil and said, I just feel like I don't really belong here. What am I doing with all these celebrities? And the other guy said, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And his last name was Armstrong, right? So imposter syndrome is one of those things that really does matter. It's part of uncertainty. I'm constantly uncertain that I'm welcome or I'm saying anything that makes any kind of sense to anyone. This is just, and Kylie will tell you that. She's listened to me talk about it a lot because she's my friend and I talk to her about these things on a consistent basis. It happens, right? So you've got to be careful when you move outside your comfort zone, which is where psychological safety exists, by the way. You should never just live outside your comfort zone. It's there for a reason. It's there to let you recover and rest. If you exercise, if you bike ride, if you go to the gym, if you do whatever, rock climb, whatever, I mean, I do a lot of these things. If you don't rest, you just injure yourself. You need recovery time from anything, right? So if you can move into that optimal performance zone, you can deal with uncertainty. You have just enough stress to give you impetus and catalyze change and curiosity and investigation. But it's not so much that you just panic and you can't do anything, right? So that's an important aspect. And comfort zones are linked to identity and tribalism. I'll talk about that another time because I've probably talked way too much already. We talked about this briefly. Failure. There is no failure. There is only feedback. Some feedback is terminal, but I can guarantee that if you do fall off a cliff and actually manage to survive it, you're probably not going to do it again, right? So feedback is really important. We need to stop seeing failure as really bad, because in uncertainty, you have to experiment to find where you're going, right? So we can't see failure as the end of everything. And there's the feedback part, right? It's really important. Oh God, I'd forgotten that this was on here. Anyway, you get to see a picture of me climbing next. I apologize in advance. I'd forgotten that this was in here with one of my trite little phrases. In failing, we have a choice, blah, blah, blah. For me, this was quite an uncertain time. This was in Dubai. I was climbing with my friend Mike, who took his own life, maybe not that long after I took these pictures with him, and I climbed with him. If you want to talk about uncertainty and not knowing where you are in the world, you look at people who don't feel that they fit anymore to the extent that they actually remove themselves, right? Uncertainty is a big thing. We can't just dismiss it as something that's very small, but it is a journey for all of us, and it is a unique journey for all of us. We just happen to travel together along the way a lot of the time, right? There are lots of types of uncertainty. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. The image in the middle I like because it's scaffolding. Now, when you're talking about dealing with uncertain situations, you cannot pre-plan everything. We've kind of talked about this already. We know that management love doing this. You can't do that. Instead of building a solid structure and pre-planning every role and every responsibility and everything before time, when you don't even know where you're going, let's plan the scaling. And I'm like, dude, you don't even know what agile methodology you're going to use. Can we relax a bit? You know, let's kind of see where we are first. You can actually instead build a scaffolding, which allows you to start building brick by brick, and you see how the architecture evolves as you build, which makes, and the beautiful thing about that is scaffolding can change shape with the architecture, and then you remove it at the end and the architecture sustains itself. Not planning everything out for eventuality, you are creating something based upon the context that you find yourself in. So we learn every day. We're curious. We communicate. We share. We collaborate. We build identities, relationships. You know, we explore. We reframe things. We shift paradigms. We change these patterns. Right? We use integrity. We do all of these things. We're just very bad at accepting, I guess, changed certainties outside personal narratives. And that's where, and I don't think I can do this too much, but that's where biases come into play. If things don't match what we want, what we've pre-categorized, what we've expected, when uncertainty doesn't turn out how we've said it must turn out this way, that can be really problematic for us, certainly for organizations. I'm sure you've noticed they don't work particularly well when they plan something for a year and then it just goes, and then, you know, they all panic and then they blame people and you get the cycle of woe and new management teams come in and there are redundancies. And, you know, if they'd iteratively taken small steps and explored things as they went, they might not have ended up there. But preaching to the converted, I'm pretty sure at this point. With biases, it's quite interesting. I think I'm near the end, by the way. I've got no idea how on time I am. So, but I think that this is interesting. With biases, we forget about biases, and this is where Cynefin comes into it. There's a thing called retrospective coherence that I don't know if anyone's familiar with. It's the ability we have to look back at things that were complex and that we had to emergently feel out as we went and attribute causality to it in a way that justifies what we did. So if you succeeded, very often it's because you're a genius. And if you failed, it's because some other git didn't do what they were supposed to do. And, oh, the dependencies weren't there and why? And actually what really happened was you felt your way through it. You weren't entirely sure what happened. It didn't quite work out how you wanted, but you had to justify what happened to yourself because you need to feel enough control to make sure that you've created things in an informed fashion. We love to think we're informed decision makers. We aren't. This is what's called a best fit mental pattern. We don't do that at all. Nobody does that. I don't do that. None of you do that. That's just how things are. What actually happens is we create what's called a first fit mental pattern based on our past experience, our current experience, and our projected future experience. And then we make an emotional decision based upon that. It's very, very interesting. That was an evolutionary advantage back in the day when a striped bit of, you know, jungle or whatever it happened to be, dotted bits of light on the veldt under a tree. We're like, I don't like the look of that. I'm getting out of here. Boom, boom, very, very quick, because that helped us survive. But in a meta-complex world where there's complex tribe in complex tribe, we like different bands, we like different sports, we like different football teams, we're right wing, we're left wing, we like Cynefin, we like Kanban, we like Scrum, we like Safe, we like whatever. We have all these tribes and some of them are really confrontational, and we belong to multiple tribes at the same time. So a lot of our decisions are actually based on experience and based on emotion, right? And we tend to think about things cognitively. Many of you have probably heard about Bloom's taxonomy. Actually, there's Krathwohl's and Harrow's taxonomies to do with affective and psychomotor domains, right? So there's a lot more to learning than just the cognitive domain. But that's what you see if you go on IC Agile courses. It's cognitive. And I'm like, there's more to it. And I'm not a big fan of personality tests, so I tend to ignore those bits on those courses. Does all of that kind of make sense? Is there anything anyone wanted to ask or challenge or whatever? I'm open to anything. Has everyone just passed out by this point? It's probably more likely. Oh, there we go. I had a nice little animated bit that I forgot about talking about informed decisions there. So here's a quick, I think we've got a few slides left. I don't have to do them all. I can skip as many as you like. Probably a good point for me to shut up and ask, you know, how do you use tools or methods to deal with uncertainty? Like, how effectively do your organizations, I think I know what the answer is going to be here from a lot of you, but how effectively do your organizations deal with uncertainty? who wants to open the can of worms? Probably nobody actually at this time of the day. So we don't have to go into it, but I find it interesting to just think about, because no single tool will allow you to do this. And this is kind of a key point that I'm aiming at here. We often pick a tool because we know it's very good, but then we try, because we become emotionally attached to it, we've bought into it, we've invested in it, we then try to apply that to every single context. How you use those tools is as important as having them in the first place, and actually having more than one tool is extremely important as well. Probably all I need to say about that slide. That is one of my favorite pictures for some reason. I don't know why, it just amuses me considerably. Quite like large wooden mallets and the egg. We finally get some Cynefin here. This is a diagram that I helped draw up with a couple of other people a while ago. Is everyone familiar with Cynefin? Should I go through a basic thing of it, or just having a quick look? Right, I'll explain Cynefin very quickly, just in case. You have 4 main domains in Cynefin. You actually have 5, you actually have 7, you actually have about 9. But basically you have clear and complicated are one domain. This is the domain of order, material linear causality, right? So you do something and you know what it's going to do, or you are going to occur from it, right? Any of you who are at BP had to sit through me talking about Cynefin for a while, probably at some point. So this might be slightly familiar, but the example that I like to give is a light switch. If you've never seen a light switch before and somebody says, go and press that, you very quickly can work out what it does. And you turn it on and it turns on, and you turn it off and it turns off. That's it. It's causal and it's linear, and it's really easy to understand. If you want to wire up a light switch, you need to have a certain level of expertise to do it safely, but it's still material and linear and causal, right? If you wire it up correctly with the correct knowledge, the light will turn and the light will turn off, and it's very nice and simple. Then you get to the complex domain. You might, I always used to say, you might come home after, being at work, everyone's at home. You might walk into another room after a heavy day of work at home and the light's off and it's dark. And 99 times out of 100, you will turn that light on because it's dark. But 1 time out of 100, you might just sit there in the dark because you feel like it. That's a human thing to do. Humans are complex. We are not ordered in any way, shape, or form, right? You cannot predict what people can do. You can only guess. So we are dispositional. We are not causal. It's a really important thing to understand, because that means that any system that we create that adds humans into it actually probably has complexities and is not just causal, right? So even in factory and production, then you get things like key person dependencies, which require skills liquidity, which blah, 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 blah. We could go into a huge discussion on that, which I'm not going to inflict on you this time of a Wednesday. But the idea is, if you get too linear and you get to automation, beautiful example, automation. I used to work in backup and data protection, and people used to say to me, why do we need backup? We've got high availability. And I'm like, really? What happens when corruption's introduced onto one of your filers? And they're like, ooh, because it's instantly transferred to the next set of filers, right? That's how it works. Whereas backups tend to strip the corruption out, and you have historical sets, which means you can move around that set of corruption, right? So automation without the human element, and that's what companies do. I want to automate to get rid of people. It's a very bad idea. They should be side-skilled to support automation, not removed, but whatever. We're talking about people who are neoliberal here. When automation goes wrong, it's catastrophic, because it's very often it's not noticed for a little bit, and that drops you into chaos, which is a terrible place to be. And all you can do in chaos is act in some way to introduce a constraint, which then allows you to modify where you're going, because in chaos you just don't know where you are. Everything's on fire, right? So you have to do something, you have to act. That's what the Chinese government did with COVID. They went bang. Might not have been the right thing to do initially, but the draconian response allowed them to grab it much quicker than a lot of Western countries who said, well, it might impinge my freedom if you do this. And I'm going to the beach, by the way. And then lots of stuff happened there and then blah, blah, blah. So, you know, in times of crisis, you need to have that authoritarian response in chaos to be able to introduce constraints and move it into a complex domain. I'm not going to explain all the bits and pieces there, but you can see kind of how it works. What we see very often, you see the little dudes arguing somewhere in the middle in the complicated bit. That's where two experts with opposing opinion and empirical evidence to support both sides start arguing. There are ways to deal with that, but it's not quick or particularly easy. So I'll probably leave that there. Cynefin is a fantastic tool. It's not a framework. It's a lens to orient yourself in what context you're really in so that you can accurately start making decisions. Right? It's a really cool thing, similar to OODA in terms of being a lens. I don't think I've got very many slides left. So were there any questions? Does anyone want to chime anything in there?
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
In the complicated domain, you have like experts, right, that analyze the problem, for example.
Yeah.
Could a problem look, could a complicated problem look complex if you don't have enough expertise, or are they intrinsically different things? If that question makes sense.
No, it makes absolute sense. And the answer is yes, but it's usually the other way around, if I listened correctly. Right. So if you think about how many things are actually extremely complex and the people on the ground are like, this is going to take a lot of work, and management say, this is easy, we've told you what to do, we've assigned you some money, just get it done. It's usually that way round, right? You can get it the other where, okay, I'll give you an example of the other way around. I used to work in IT support from first to third line. I've done for my sins, my time in DevOps and Ops Dev, if you like. And I remember one time where I was trying to fix a monitor. It was my monitor as well. This was at home. It was inexcusable. I could not work out what was wrong with it. I did everything that I could possibly think of. And then I realized that I hadn't plugged it in because I'm an idiot. And I looked at the most complex possible scenario that I could think of rather than actually just going through a kind of root cause analysis. Root cause analysis is an issue in a complex domain. That was not a complex domain, right? A car engine is another example. Oh, this is really hard. No, car engines are easy. Like, they're not easy if you don't have the expertise, but you can take a car apart to its every single tiniest piece, and then you can reassemble that car from every tiny piece, and that car will work.
So I think
that's do that to a human. Sorry
to interrupt you. I was just going to say that was my point. Like, if you are not a very good mechanic and you're looking at an engine, like, intrinsically it's complicated, but it might look complex because you don't have the abilities, the expertise to do
exactly. Yeah. Without having the expertise. So one of the key aspects of a complex domain is that coherence is not definable, and anything you do will have unintended consequences. Now, that can happen with something that's complicated if you don't have the level of expertise required to understand the causality of what you're doing, right? But it's still a complicated thing that you're dealing with, but you are complex. And so you have made the scenario complex by not having that expertise and still going, no, it'll be all right. I'll see what I can do. Oh, doesn't work, and whatever, right? But then you bring an expert in and they go, oh, what have you done? But because of their experience, and by the way, experience isn't everything. In Agile, certifications, everyone's going nuts for them, of course. Experience, how many years of experience do you have as a unicorn doing these things and this and this and this? 50 years of experience doing this in banking and oil and this, and can you stick a broom up your bottom and sweep the floor at the same time? And I'm like, no, who could do that? I know people who've been tying their shoes for 20 years who probably still shouldn't be trusted to do it. Same goes for knives and forks. Experience does not mean everything, but it's a good indicator of being able to at least competently start doing stuff, right? So that's something to kind of think about. You can mistake things in the complicated domain. Much more often what happens is a company says, this is ordered, this should be easy, let's just get it done. And the people, and this is why distributed decision making, especially with agility and product models and agile teams, is key, because it allows the run and the change to be run at the team level. They know what the hell they're doing, and the management are supposed to be facilitating communication, but very often they're saying, I know this. And you get this argument, I go into it now, but the difference between accountability, responsibility, and ownership very often isn't well understood by management, where they're the ones who really should be understanding this stuff, right? So that's an interesting. By the way, anyone who wants to explore this more is more than welcome to get in touch later. I don't want to take too much time up, so I'm gonna move on a little bit here. Here's another little thing that Kylie see me talk about quite a lot: remote agility work. It's not really remote, it's not really agility, it's just a general kind of supportive thing, and it's not really a framework, but kudos to them for calling it remote agility framework, because it means that their domain name is remote AF, which is just one of the best domains ever. So the idea behind this is you are supporting whatever frameworks people have to work in a distributed fashion. Doesn't matter if you're on site, you are hybrid, you're remote, but it allows you to deal with uncertainty where people are. However you are working, there are ways to support being able to understand this and effectively move on. If you haven't looked at them, I really recommend their stuff. I kind of helped them design a couple of their courses because I was so impressed when I looked at their stuff. I was like, okay, I'm going to buy onto the early adopter program and help them with it. And that's kind of where I've ended up. So they have this workplace future perspective, which is beautiful because you can project a mess. Beautiful for uncertainty, because what you're doing is you're saying, here's where I am, my current state, here's my plausible future state, here's my utopia. Now let's take that and kind of go on the wall, and it gives you a fuzzy liminality, like a projected mess of where you think you might end up and what might go wrong if you just leave things the way they are. So it's a really cool little tool. Please feel free to steal it, use it, do whatever. They're pretty cool with that kind of thing as well. So those are a couple of tools that I don't want to call them tools, but lenses, if you want, that I use. So we're pretty much at the end. I'm going to get this out of the way. One thing I love about scuba diving is that you have this method called the stop, breathe, think, respond. Anytime uncertainty hits you, stop, take a breath, think about it, feel into it, and then start responding. Fast feedback, iteratively. It's the only way you're going to deal with uncertainty and moving forwards, right? Whatever you do, don't make a very large plan and then hinge everything upon it, because it's probably not going to happen. It's just a fact of uncertainty. I'm not even going to bother reading out this wall of text. So everyone, I think you've probably all passed out by this point, so I'll leave it there. But there we go. There's a few little bits and pieces. And last but not least, remember to breathe. And I think I've massively probably overrun, and I apologize profusely if I have. But I said we were going to open it for questions, and then I just talked to everyone. Sorry. Does it make sense? Are people happy with it? Does it kind of help, hinder, raise questions? Can probably stop sharing now.
So Mara's asking in the chat, what was the website for failure as a teacher on the previous slide?
I'll put it into the chat. Best domain name ever. They're all Australian, so they think it's hilarious. That bless them. Oh, sorry. You mean the previous slide? nofailureonlyfeedback.com. Okay, that was my Yoda slide. My apologies. I've misread that. Yeah, nofailureonlyfeedback.com. I hope I've updated the domain. Anyway, that just goes somewhere to one of my websites saying, if I've done something cool, then you can, you know, feedback to me, because feedback's really, really important. There is failure. I'm now going to confuse things more. The failure comes from ignoring the feedback. That's where the failure lies. So don't ignore feedback. And if you give it graciously. There we go. I'm saying that at the end of a talk, which makes it sound like I'm saying, please don't beat me up. That's not quite what I'm saying, but
Chris, thank you. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to hand over to Gary, and Gary's going to give us a little bit of information about our next few talks because he has more information on them than I do at the moment.
Excellent. Well, first, yeah, thank you, Chris. That was a great talk. There was a lot in it, and a lot of really good information. So thank you for coming along. Thanks for doing that. Next time at Lean Agile. So our next session is our morning meetup. So we run 2 meetups every month. Our morning meetup runs on the 4th Wednesday of every month, and that will be on the 28th this month. So 2 weeks today, first thing in the morning. It's a lean coffee. So if you've got any questions, ideas, concerns, topics, any of the things that Chris talked about, you want to talk about more, come along and we can talk about that there and then. Our evening meetups, which run on the 2nd Wednesday, so this is the 2nd Wednesday of the month, we are talking about, that'll be August 11th. We haven't quite got it signed off yet. I'm hoping we will have that in the next day or so. The details will, as always, go up at twitter.com/leanagilegla and on Meetup. The details will all be there. And then beyond that, we have September and October already lined up. Kylie has been absolutely on the ball with that. So we have Elfit speaking in September, and we have Lindsay Tulloch in October talking about Kermit and community. So we have a whole bunch of talks lined up. So we're going to be back every month. We've never missed a month. We're going to keep going. That's what we've got lined up so far. That takes us to October. But if you would like to speak, please let us know. It doesn't have to be a full-length talk like Chris did. It could be a short talk. It can be a 5-minute lightning talk, and we'll pair you up with someone else. It could be a 20-minute talk, 40 minutes, whatever your length is. You let us know, and we will make it work somewhere. And if you've never spoken before or want some help, we will help you kind of put it all together and make it as great as it can be. And likewise, if there's somebody you would like to hear speak, let us know. We have been fortunate. One of the few fortunate things kind of LinkedIn is all the speakers are at home as well. So basically, everyone that we have asked has said yes. We've really not had anyone say no. So if there's anyone you want to see, let us know, and we can go and ask and find out and get them along at some point that works for everyone. That is it. Thank you very much for coming along. Thanks again to Chris. Thanks Kaylee for helping organize everything as always. And we will see you next time.
Who should I drop slides to, by the way, if anyone wants them? I've had a couple of people ask.
If you drop them to Kaylee and or me, we'll sort of get out via the usual channels.
Sure. Perfect. Thanks very much. Pleasure to come along. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Kaylee, you want to stop the recording?
Oh, good idea.